Imagine someone offering you an opportunity that could completely change your life. It might be a new career path, a creative project, a chance to learn something you've never tried before. At first, the idea feels exciting. You picture what might happen if you said yes. You imagine a different version of your life. But then another thought appears almost instantly. That's not really me. I'm not the kind of person who does that. And just like that, the opportunity disappears. You move on. Life continues exactly as before. What's interesting about moments like these is that they rarely feel dramatic. They feel normal. It feels like you're simply being honest with yourself. But something subtle just happened. You didn't reject the opportunity because it was impossible. You rejected it because it didn't match the identity you believe you have. And once you start paying attention to this pattern, you begin to realize something surprising. Your identity might be shaping far more of your behavior than you think. You're often told that understanding who you are is important. People talk about finding themselves, discovering their strengths, understanding their personality, defining what kind of person they are. In theory, identity should make life easier. It should help you make better decisions. It should give you direction. It should help you understand what kind of future you want. But something strange happens when identity becomes too fixed. Instead of helping you grow, it can quietly start limiting you. You stop exploring paths that don't match the story you tell yourself. You avoid experiences that don't feel like you. You dismiss possibilities simply because they don't fit the version of yourself you've already accepted. Over time, identity stops acting like a guide and starts acting like a boundary, one that keeps you locked out of life experiences that you might actually enjoy, the things you might be good at. This raises an interesting question. If identity is supposed to help you understand yourself, why does it so often prevent you from becoming something new? Think about how often you describe yourself using simple labels. You might say things like, "I'm not a creative person. I'm terrible with money. I'm not confident. I'm bad at public speaking. I'm just not disciplined." At first, these statements feel honest. They feel like simple observations about who you are. But the moment you repeat these labels often enough, they begin to shape how you behave. If you believe you're bad at speaking, you avoid situations where you might have to speak, and any chance of finding out if you might actually be good at it. If you believe you're not creative, you stop exploring creative ideas. If you believe you're bad with money, you avoid learning about finances. And slowly, without realizing it, your behavior begins to reinforce the identity you already believe. You don't try certain things. You don't explore certain opportunities. You don't test certain possibilities. Not because they're impossible, but because they don't match the version of yourself you've accepted. Over time, the identity becomes stronger, and your behavior begins to look like proof that the identity was true all along. To understand why identity has this kind of influence, you need to look at how your brain tries to stay consistent. Your mind doesn't like contradictions. It prefers your actions, beliefs, and self-image to align with each other. When your behavior conflicts with how you see yourself, your brain experiences tension. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. Imagine you believe you're not a confident person. Then suddenly you find yourself speaking confidently in front of a group. Your brain notices the conflict. Your behavior doesn't match your identity, and that creates discomfort. To remove that discomfort, your brain has two options. It can update the identity, or it can adjust your behavior. Most of the time, adjusting behavior feels easier. So instead of challenging the belief you have about yourself, your brain quietly encourages behavior that confirms it. This is why identity becomes such a powerful psychological force. Once a belief about who you are becomes established, your brain begins guiding your behavior in ways that reinforce it. Over time, identity becomes a kind of invisible blueprint. It quietly shapes your decisions, your habits, your ambitions, and even the opportunities you believe are realistic for you. You can see this pattern in many areas of life. Think about exercise. If you believe you're not an athletic person, you're less likely to try activities that challenge that belief. You might avoid gyms, skip workouts, or assume fitness simply isn't for you. But the interesting part is that the identity often forms before the evidence. Maybe you struggled with sports when you were younger. Maybe someone told you that you weren't athletic. Maybe you simply compared yourself to someone else and decided you didn't measure up. Over time, the identity formed. And once the identity formed, your behavior began reinforcing it. The same pattern appears with creativity. Someone might say, "I'm not creative," but creativity is rarely something people are simply born with. It's something developed through practice, through experimentation, through being willing to be bad at something long enough to get better at it. Yet once the identity appears, the practice never begins. Because trying would challenge the identity. And the brain would rather protect the story than risk the discomfort of contradiction. The same thing happens with confidence. If you believe you're not confident, you avoid situations that require confidence. You stay quiet. You hesitate. You hold back. And each time you do, the identity feels more and more true. Each avoidance becomes another piece of evidence. Each missed moment becomes another confirmation. Over time, your identity quietly shapes what you attempt and what you never even consider. This is where the identity trap appears. Identity becomes a kind of psychological cage, not because identity itself is harmful, but because it becomes too narrow. When you strongly define who you are, you also begin defining who you are not. You create invisible boundaries around what you believe is possible for you. You stop experimenting. You stop exploring. You stop testing different versions of yourself. And over time, your future becomes shaped not by your potential, but by the story you've accepted about yourself. The trap is subtle. You don't feel trapped. You simply feel like you're being realistic. Like you're playing to your strengths. Like you're just honest about your limitations. But in many cases, what feels like self-awareness is actually self-restriction. The limits you believe are real are, in many cases, just reflections of the identity you've accepted. Not facts about your ability. Just stories about it. And stories can change. There's a concept in psychology that's worth knowing about here. Carol Dweck, a researcher at Stanford, spent decades studying why some people grow through challenges, while others avoid them entirely. What she found was that people tend to hold one of two beliefs about their own abilities. Some people believe their qualities are essentially fixed, that you're either good at something or you're not, and effort doesn't change that fundamental reality much. Others believe that their qualities can be developed, that ability is something you build over time through practice and persistence. She called these the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And what she found was striking. People with a fixed mindset tend to avoid challenges that might expose their limitations. They avoid effort that might lead to failure. Because failure, in that framework, doesn't mean I haven't learned this yet. It means I'm not capable of this, which feels like a statement about who they are, not just what they've done so far. This is exactly the identity trap at work. When identity is fixed, every challenge becomes a threat. Every failure becomes evidence. Every risk becomes something to avoid rather than something to learn from. But here's what makes this genuinely hopeful. Mindsets are not permanent. Identities are not fixed. They feel fixed. That's the trap. But the research is clear. The stories people tell about themselves can shift. And when they do, behavior shifts with them. Identity is not the enemy. Understanding yourself is important. It helps you navigate the world. It helps you make decisions. But identity becomes dangerous when it stops evolving, when it becomes rigid, when it quietly defines the limits of what you believe you can become. Because the most interesting thing about identity is this. Identity is not something you discover once and keep forever. It's something you shape through behavior. Every time you try something new, your identity shifts slightly. Every time you act in a way that contradicts an old label, you loosen that label's grip. Every time you challenge a belief about yourself, your identity expands. Which means the most powerful question you can ask yourself isn't, who am I, but something slightly different. Who might I become if I stopped believing certain things about myself? That question works differently to most questions you ask about yourself. Most self-reflection looks backwards. It tries to understand who you've been. This question looks forward. It asks who you're capable of becoming. And the answer, almost always, is more than you currently believe. Once you start sitting with that question, something interesting happens. The boundaries of identity begin to loosen. You begin trying things that previously felt impossible. You begin exploring parts of yourself that were hidden behind old labels. Things you told yourself weren't for you. Versions of yourself you dismissed before you even tried. And slowly, the identity that once limited you begins to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but one decision at a time, one small contradiction at a time, one moment of trying something that doesn't fit the old story, and surviving it. Because the truth is, identity isn't something you find. It's something you build, continuously, imperfectly, through the choices you make about what to try, what to pursue, and what old stories you're finally willing to question. And the moment you realize that, the moment identity stops feeling like a discovery and starts feeling like a decision, the trap starts to lose its power. Not because the old beliefs disappear overnight, but because you stop letting them decide what happens next.